The next thing we did was we graph using the intercepts. An intercept just means to cross. So there's two intercepts. So remember, this is your y-axis. So this is your y-intercept. It just means where does my line cross my y-axis? All right, and you have one other intercept. So remember, this is your x-axis. So this is my x-intercept. It's wherever my line crosses my x-axis. So the one thing you want to notice here, though, is we can look at this point right here. This is 0.5. Wherever we cross the y-axis, the x value is 0. Look right here. The x value is 0. So if I'm up here, that's 0, 1. If I'm right here, that's 0, 1.5. But it doesn't matter. Any point on the y-axis, the x value is 0. So we know if we want to find the y-intercept, it's going to be wherever x is 0. So if I go back to my equation over here, and I want to find my y-intercept, I can just plug in 0 for x. So I know that my y-intercept is where x equals 0. So if I plug in x is 0, I'll get my y-intercept. So I'll have negative 0.5 times 0 plus 2y equals 1. And anything times 0 is 0, so that's gone. So I get just 2y equals 1. And I want just y, so I'll divide by 2 on both sides. And I get y equals 1/2. And I could write that as 0.5 if I wanted. And remember, the point has your x value, which was right here. We plugged in 0. And a y value, which is right here, 0.5. And so our y-intercept is 0.5, which is exactly what we see right there. So that lines up perfectly what we have on the graph. So that is our y-intercept. So now we want to do our x-intercept. So now let's look at our x-intercept over here. Our x-intercept is negative 2, 0. So now notice here the y value is 0. And just think about it. It doesn't matter where you cross the x-axis. Maybe you could cross here. That would be negative 1, 0. Maybe you would cross at the origin, which is 0, 0. Or maybe here, and that would be 1, 0. But anywhere where you cross the x-axis, your y value is 0. So we know if we plug in y is 0, we'll get wherever we cross the x-axis. And that's exactly what we do. So we will say our x-intercept is wherever y equals 0. So if we plug in y is 0, we'll get that x-intercept. And that's what we'll do. So this time we're not plugging in anything for x. We're plugging in for y. So 2 times 0 instead of y. So anything times 0 is 0, so that goes away. And I have negative 0.5x equals 1. To get rid of that, I'm going to divide by negative 1/2. And 1/2 goes into 1 2 times, and negative or positive divided by a negative is a negative, so that's just negative 2, which is exactly what we see here. So again, our x-intercept is negative 2, and remember, every point has an x and a y value, so our x is negative 2. Our y was what we plugged in for 0, and so that is negative 2, 0. So that's how we find the x-intercept, and remember our y-intercept is right over here. So let's try one more. So give that a shot. Plug in 0 for x to get your y-intercept. Plug in 0 for y to get your x-intercept. And then graph them, see what you get, and then come back and we'll do it together and you can see if you got it correctly. So again, let's check this out. So I'm going to say, I know my y-intercept is wherever x equals 0. So I'm going to plug in 0 for x. So I get negative 0 plus 5y equals 15. Now negative 0 or positive 0, it's still just 0. So that doesn't affect our equation anyway. So we get just 5y equals 15. Divide both sides by 5. And we get y equals 3. So remember, this is a point. Our y coordinate is 3. But remember, we plugged in x for 0. So that point is 0, 3. And we can go and we can graph that. So 0, 3, remember this is y, this is x, so 0, 3 is right here. And notice it's right on the axis because it's an intercept, right? So this is my y-intercept. All right, so now let's find our x-intercept. And our x-intercept is going to be where y equals 0. So if I plug in 0 for y, I'll find the matching x value. So that's what I'm going to do. So I have negative x plus 5 times 0 equals 15. And so anything times 0 is just 0. So I get negative x equals 15. And so there's two ways to think about this. If negative x is 15, then x is negative 15. But if you forget that, you can just remember that this is really a negative 1 times x. And so I could divide both sides by negative 1 to get rid of that. And I'd get x equals negative 15. So again, let's find the point, right? My x value is negative 15, but the y value that I plugged in to get there was 0. So y value is 0. So put that right there. And so let's go plot that. So negative 15 on the x-axis, all the way over here, and 0 for y. And so that is negative 15, 0. And that is my x-intercept. All right, so the idea here, though, is to graph finding those points. So once you find those two, you can connect them, and I'll try and go straight as I can. I missed it a little bit. But that's your line by using your intercepts. And remember, just intercept just means where they cross. And the key takeaways here are that for your x-intercept, it's always where y equals 0, because it's on the x-axis. Your y-intercept is always where x equals 0, because it's on the y-axis.